the enchantress of Kolongo. The village of Kolongo was known for its rich lands, grand festivals, and deep spiritual traditions. It was a place where honor meant everything, and one's reputation carried more weight than gold. Yet, amid the peaceful harmony of Kolongo, one woman stood apart, Naya, the embodiment of beauty and mystery. Naya was unlike any other woman in the village. With skin like polished ebony, eyes that shimmered like the deepest night, and a body that swayed with the grace of the river, she was a force that no man could ignore. Wherever she walked, heads turned, and whispers followed. But Naya's beauty was more than a gift, it was a weapon. She thrived on power, not through hard work or wisdom, but by manipulating the hearts of powerful men. Her reputation stretched far beyond Kolongo, reaching distant villages where her name was spoken in hushed voices. Men fell to their knees for her, lavishing her with golden jewelry, rare fabrics, and lavish feasts, while their wives wept in silence. To Naya, it was a game. A challenge. She loved the chase, the thrill of knowing she could turn devoted husbands into desperate fools. And so, despite the warnings from elders and priestesses, despite the curses whispered by broken wives, Naya continued her reign of seduction. But one man still eluded her grasp. The untouchable king. Chief Zuberi was a man unlike any other. He was the most powerful leader in Kolongo, a warrior, a king, a man whose very name struck fear in the hearts of enemies. With his towering figure, fierce eyes, and voice as deep as thunder, he commanded respect wherever he went. But it was not his strength alone that made him feared, it was his wisdom. He was a man of tradition and discipline, and unlike other men Naya had conquered, he was utterly devoted to one woman, his wife, Amoni. Amoni was no ordinary wife. She was intelligent, graceful, and deeply spiritual. Some even whispered that she carried the wisdom of the ancestors in her heart. Despite the many temptations surrounding Zuberi, Amoni's presence kept him rooted like an unshakable tree. This enraged Naya. She had conquered the greatest of warriors, the wealthiest of traders, and the most handsome of noblemen, but Zuberi had never looked at her twice. He treated her as he would a passing shadow, unworthy of his attention. And Naya could not accept that. To her, Zuberi was the ultimate prize. If she could break the strongest man in Kolongo, she would be unstoppable. The first move. One evening, during the festival of the twin moons, Kolongo gathered in the grand village square, where the beating of drums filled the air and firelight danced against the night sky. Women adorned in colorful beads swayed gracefully, while men clashed their spears in rhythmic movements. It was a night of celebration and unity. And Naya saw her chance. She arrived draped in the finest silk, a shimmering green dress that clung to her curves like water over smooth stones. Gold bracelets jingled with each movement, and her perfume, a rare essence from distant lands, wrapped around her like an invisible enchantment. As she walked through the crowd, she noticed how men paused mid-sentence just to steal a glance at her. Wives turned away in frustration, gripping their husbands' arms tightly. Naya smiled to herself. But there was only one man she truly wanted to see her tonight. Zuberi. He stood near the great fire, speaking with warriors and village elders, his deep laughter carrying over the festival. His broad chest gleamed with sweat from the earlier dance, and his eyes burned with authority. Naya's heart pounded. She had charmed countless men, but something about Zuberi's strength thrilled her in a way she had never felt before. Tonight, she would begin her conquest. With the grace of a serpent, she glided through the crowd, making her way towards him. As she approached, she lowered her gaze, feigning shyness, allowing the firelight to cast an ethereal glow on her skin. Zuberi turned his head slightly, sensing her presence. For the first time, his eyes met hers. Naya smiled slowly, her lips parting just enough to reveal the glimmer of her teeth. Then, in a voice as smooth as honey, she spoke. "Mighty Chief Zuberi. Tell me, Have the gods ever blessed a man with such strength and wisdom, and yet forgotten to reward him with true happiness? The words were carefully chosen, designed to plant the first seed of doubt. She expected him to hesitate, to falter, to show even the slightest weakness. But Zubri did not smile. He did not blush. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her with eyes that were unreadable. And then, in a voice like rolling thunder, he replied, "A king who has the love of an honorable woman needs no other blessing." Naya's smile faltered. For the first time in her life, a man had not fallen for her charm. But instead of retreating, instead of admitting defeat, she only became more determined. She would have him. No matter the cost. Little did she know, the cost would be far greater than she ever imagined. A forbidden obsession. The seed had been planted. Although Chief Zubri had dismissed her with his firm words, Naya was not one to give up so easily. She had seen something in his eyes that night, a flicker of intrigue, a moment of hesitation. It was enough. She knew men. She knew their weaknesses. No man was truly untouchable. And so, she began her pursuit. The slow fall. At first, Zubri resisted. He avoided her gaze when they crossed paths in the marketplace. He ignored the sweet fragrances that trailed behind her. He even shortened his visits to the village square, choosing instead to remain in the privacy of his palace. But Naya was patient. She understood that true power did not come from force, but from persistence. She began to appear in places she knew he would be. At the training grounds, where warriors honed their skills, she would stand under the shade of the great baobab tree, watching with admiration. At the riverbank, where he often went to clear his mind, she would coincidentally arrive, gathering water with the village women. Each time, she would offer just a glance, just a smile. A silent challenge. And slowly, Zubri began to notice. Her presence became a whisper in his mind, a shadow that followed him even in his solitude. It was innocent at first. A lingering look. A moment of curiosity. But soon, curiosity turned to desire. Zubri found himself distracted, his thoughts drifting toward Naya when he should have been focusing on matters of the kingdom. His laughs became fewer, his patience with his warriors grew thin, and worst of all, his home began to suffer. Amani, his wife, felt the shift immediately. The man who once held her in the highest regard now spent more time lost in thought, more time away from their children. At night, she would turn to him, but his warmth was absent. His mind was elsewhere. And she knew exactly why. A wife's warning. Amani was no fool. She had heard the whispers, had seen the stolen glances. She had known from the beginning that Naya was dangerous. But she had underestimated her persistence. One evening, as the village prepared for a full moon celebration, Amani made a decision. She sought out Naya. She found her near the market, draped in her usual extravagant attire, surrounded by a group of admiring men. Amani approached without hesitation, her presence commanding silence. The men stepped aside, sensing the weight of the moment. Naya turned, raising a delicate brow as she took in the woman before her. Amani was beautiful in her own way, graceful, poised, with a quiet strength that spoke of wisdom beyond her years. But Naya saw no threat. Just a woman desperately clinging to something already slipping from her hands. Amani spoke calmly, but firmly. "Stay away from my husband." Naya's lips curled into a smirk. "Your husband," she said, feigning innocence. "Chief Zubri is the leader of all Kolongo. He belongs to no one." Amani's eyes did not waver. "You may fool others, but you cannot fool me. I know your ways. You bring destruction wherever you go. But be warned, Naya, some battles are greater than you can imagine." Naya laughed. She had faced angry wives before. Women who cried, who begged, who cursed her name in the streets. But none of them had ever stopped her. Why should Harmony be any different? You sound afraid, Naya mused, tilting her head. Perhaps you know, deep down, that Zubri is already mine. For the first time, Harmony smiled. A knowing smile. One that sent an unexpected chill down Naya's spine. Then, she said something that would haunt Naya in the days to come. The river may look calm, but beneath its surface, the current is strong enough to drag you under. Beware, Naya. You are swimming in dangerous waters. With that, Harmony turned and walked away, her steps measured, her head held high. Naya watched her go, her amusement fading. For the first time, doubt crept into her mind. But only for a moment. She pushed it aside. Zubri was falling for her. And nothing, not Harmony, not the whispers of the villagers, not even the gods themselves, would stop her from claiming him. Or so she believed. Because what Naya did not know was that Harmony possessed a secret. A powerful, ancestral secret passed down from the women of Kolongo for generations. And once unleashed, it would change everything. The hunt was over. The game had begun, the curse unleashed. The night was perfect. The sky stretched endlessly above Kolongo, a deep indigo blanket pierced with a million stars. A warm breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and distant fires from the village below. But tonight, Naya's focus was only on one thing. Chief Zubri had finally invited her. It had happened earlier that day. A messenger, one of Zubri's trusted men, had come to her home with a sealed parchment. The chief requests your presence tonight at his private mountain retreat. Only you. Come in your finest attire. Naya's heart had nearly stopped. She had won. Harmony's warning was nothing but empty threats. The whispers of the villagers. Meaningless. Chief Zubri had finally chosen her. And so, as the sun set behind the great mountains, Naya stood before her mirror, adorned in her most breathtaking attire. A gown of deep crimson silk wrapped around her curves, embroidered with golden patterns of the sun and moon. Golden bangles jingled on her wrist, and her hair was woven with precious gemstones. She was a queen. And tonight, she would claim her throne. The journey to darkness. The ride to the mountain retreat was long and silent. A pair of guards accompanied her in a grand, enclosed chariot, their expressions cold and unreadable. Naya, however, was unfazed. She sat regally, her heart thrumming with excitement. When they arrived, the sight before her was unlike anything she had ever seen. The retreat was not the luxurious palace she had imagined. Instead, it was an ancient temple, built into the side of the mountain. Massive stone pillars stretched toward the sky, their surfaces covered in strange carvings, symbols of gods and spirits Naya did not recognize. Torches flickered along the entrance, their flames burning blue instead of gold. Something about it felt off. A shadow of unease crept into her mind, but she quickly pushed it aside. This was a celebration. A victory. She stepped forward, her golden sandals clicking against the stone pathway. And then, Zubri appeared. He stood at the entrance, dressed in ceremonial robes of deep purple, his face unreadable. But his eyes. They were not the eyes of a man surrendering to love. They were the eyes of a man preparing for something inevitable. Something dark. The Feast of Shadows. Inside the temple, a grand feast had been prepared. Exotic meats, rare fruits, goblets filled with deep red wine. A sight of pure indulgence. Naya was the only guest. As she took her seat beside Zubri, she noticed how quiet it was. No music. No laughter. No sounds of servants moving about. Just silence. And then, the first strange occurrence happened. Naya reached for her goblet, lifting it to her lips. But before she could take a sip, the wine inside froze solid. She gasped, setting it down quickly. Zubri said nothing. A second later, the torches flickered, not with wind, but as if in response to something unseen. The shadows along the walls began to shift and dance, forming shapes that did not belong. Naya's heart pounded. What is happening? She thought. And then, from the farthest end of the temple, Amoni stepped forward. Dressed in ceremonial white, her face was calm. Too calm. Naya's confidence wavered. Why was Amoni here? She turned to Zubri, expecting an explanation. But before she could speak, he and Amoni began to chant. Low. Steady. Ancient words that carried power. And then, the room grew unbearably cold. Naya's breath came out in visible puffs. Her body froze in place. And then, it happened. The sacred pot at the center of the room, one she had mistaken for decoration, began to shake violently. Its surface cracked. And from within, something moved. Naya's mouth opened in a silent scream as a massive serpent slithered out. Its scales shimmered, reflecting the flickering flames. Its eyes glowed, not with life, but with an unholy hunger. Naya tried to move. Tried to run. But she couldn't. The air around her had turned heavy, pinning her in place as the serpent slithered toward her. Zubri and Amoni's chanting grew louder. And then, the truth struck her like lightning. This was not a celebration. This was a ritual. And she was the offering. The price of power. The serpent rose to its full height, its massive body towering above her. And then, it spoke. A voice that rattled her bones, that echoed across time itself. You desired the wealth of kings, the love of power. And now, power desires you. Terror flooded her veins as she realized the horrifying truth. Zubri had not fallen for her charms. He had lured her here. For years, his wealth and power had come at a cost. The serpent spirit granted him dominion over Kolongo, but in return, he had to make offerings. And the offerings had to be beautiful women. Women who craved power. Women just like Naya. She struggled, fought against the invisible force holding her down. No. No. But it was too late. The serpent lunged, wrapping its massive body around her. Pain, indescribable, suffocating pain, ripped through her as its energy began to drain her very essence. The warmth of her skin faded. The light in her eyes dimmed. The beauty that had once been her greatest weapon was stripped away. Her final, gasping breath was drowned by the roar of the serpent as it completed its ritual. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the temple fell silent once more. The serpent slithered back into the pot. The torches returned to normal. And Naya was gone. Zubri stood, adjusting his ceremonial robes. Amani turned to him, her face unreadable. It is done, she whispered. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains. In the village below, the people continued with their lives, unaware that another woman had vanished into legend. And the serpent waited for the next offering. A fate worse than death. The air in the temple was thick with power, ancient, oppressive, inescapable. Naya's body trembled, yet she could not move. Before her, the serpent spirit loomed, its massive body shifting in slow, deliberate coils, its eyes burning with a hunger deeper than any she had ever known. Then, it spoke. Its voice was not of this world. It carried the weight of centuries, the echoes of forgotten souls, the whispers of those who had come before her. You desired men of power. Now, you belong to me. Naya screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the thick air. The serpent lunged, wrapping around her like a noose. A cold, paralyzing force spread through her body, squeezing her soul, draining her of everything she had ever been. She tried to fight. But the spirit was stronger. Pain like fire erupted in her veins, coursing through her, unraveling her from the inside out. She felt her beauty, her greatest weapon, her pride, her identity, slipping away. Her skin burned. Her bones ached. And then, darkness. The awakening. When Naya opened her eyes, she was no longer in the temple. She was in her own home, lying on her sleeping mat, covered in fine silks. For a moment, she believed it had all been a terrible nightmare. But something was wrong. Her body felt weak, as if she had not eaten in days. Her limbs were heavy, her skin cold. And then, she caught sight of her reflection in the polished bronze mirror across the room. She gasped. The face staring back at her was not her own. Her once smooth, radiant skin was dull, her complexion ashen. Her lips, once full and inviting, were now dry and cracked. And her eyes. The bright, mesmerizing glow that had captivated countless men was dimmed, replaced by a strange, shadowy hollowness. Naya stumbled backward, knocking over a bowl of water. No. No, this isn't real. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She was just tired. The feast, the wine, the long journey, it had exhausted her. This was nothing. A long bath, some rest, and she would be herself again. She clung to that belief like a dying ember in the wind. But the wind was stronger. And the ember was fading. The change. The next few days passed in a blur of confusion and fear. The strange symptoms worsened. Naya's skin grew rough, patches of it peeling like old bark. A strange itch spread over her arms and legs, dry, scaly patches appearing where smoothness once was. Her hair thinned, strands falling with every touch. And the worst part. The whispers. She heard them everywhere. When she passed the village square, when she walked by the market, when she crossed the river banks. The villagers were talking. But not in admiration. They no longer envied her. They no longer desired her. They feared her. The first encounter. One morning, Naya walked through the market, her usual confidence reduced to 4 steps. She had covered herself in the finest fabrics to hide her deteriorating body. But it didn't help. The moment she stepped into the crowd, the murmurs began. Did you see her face? Something is wrong with her. It's the curse of the spirits. She was too greedy, and now, she pays the price. Naya gritted her teeth, trying to ignore them. Then, suddenly, she felt a hand grip her wrist. An elderly woman, a village healer, peered at her with wide, knowing eyes. You have been touched, she whispered. Naya yanked her hand away. Leave me alone. But the healer did not move. You carry a darkness, child. The spirits have marked you. Do you hear them whispering? Naya froze. Her heart pounded. Because the woman was right. She did hear them. At night, in the silence of her home, she heard hissing. A soft, slithering sound in the shadows. She had told herself it was just the wind. But deep down, she knew better. Leave me. Naya screamed, pushing the woman aside. She ran. Through the marketplace, through the narrow village paths, past the homes of the men who once adored her. But no one stopped her. No one called after her. Because Naya was no longer a woman of beauty and desire. She was a woman of fear. The fear spreads. Days passed, and Naya's isolation grew. The powerful men who had once competed for her attention now avoided her gaze. The wives who had once cursed her name in anger now pitied her. She was no longer a threat. She was a warning. A story mothers whispered to their daughters. Beware the path of greed, or you will end up like Naya. She had spent her life chasing power, beauty, and men. And now, she had none of them. Her body was failing. Her soul was marked. And the worst was yet to come. Because at night, the serpent still whispered. Waiting. The wrath of the ancestors. Naya had never known fear like this. Not the fear of losing a man. Not the fear of being outshined by another woman. This was different. This was the fear of losing herself. Her once beautiful skin had turned dry and cracked, strange patterns forming like ancient carvings across her arms and legs. Her voice, once sultry and commanding, had grown hoarse, her breath carrying an unnatural chill. And the whispers. The serpent still whispered. Every night, from the darkest corners of her home. It called her name, taunting her, reminding her of the deal she had never agreed to, yet was now bound to. She could feel it inside her, its presence coiled around her soul, suffocating her from within. And now, as the villagers' eyes filled with fear instead of admiration, as children ran from her in the streets, Naya knew. If she did not act now, she would cease to be human. She had to find Mama Johi. The only one who could help her. The mystic priestess. Mama Johi lived on the outskirts of Kolongo, in a hut surrounded by ancient trees, their roots said to touch the spirit world itself. Few dared to visit her unless they had no other choice. Naya had no other choice. She approached the small wooden door and raised a trembling hand. Before she could knock, a voice called from inside. Enter, child. I have been expecting you. Naya hesitated. Then, slowly, she pushed the door open. Inside, a single candle flickered, illuminating shelves lined with bottles of strange powders, dried herbs, and old scrolls covered in forgotten languages. At the center of the room sat Mama Johi. Her eyes were milky white, blind to the world but seeing beyond it. Naya fell to her knees before her, tears burning her cheeks. Please, help me. I don't know what's happening to me. Mama Joy sighed, as if she already knew the burden Naya carried. She reached forward, placing a bony hand over Naya's forehead. And in that moment, Naya's body convulsed. Visions flooded her mind. Fire the serpent's eyes, glowing in the darkness. Fire the temple, drenched in the power of ancient spirits. Fire Zubri and Amoni, chanting as the ritual sealed her fate. Naya gasped, her body collapsing to the floor. When she opened her eyes, Mama Joy's expression was grave. You have been marked by the serpent. Naya's stomach twisted. Can it be undone? The priestess nodded slowly. Yes, but the path will not be easy. Naya leaned forward desperately. Tell me. I'll do anything. Mama Joy's white eyes seemed to pierce into her soul. Then listen carefully, child. The price of redemption. Mama Joy's voice was steady as she spoke. The serpent takes from those who take from others. You have stolen much, love, loyalty, peace. Now, it steals from you. To break the curse, you must return all that you have taken. Naya froze. Return all that she had taken. The wealth. The gift. The power. All of it. And worse, she had to confess. She had to stand before the village elders and admit her sins. Naya shook her head. No. No, I can't. I will be ruined. They will cast me out. Mama Joy's face remained unmoved. If you do not, the curse will consume you. You will no longer be feared. You will no longer be anything. You will become a shadow, a lost soul, forever trapped between worlds. Naya shuddered. Her beauty was already fading. The whispers were growing louder. The curse was taking her. She had no choice. She had to do it. She had to reclaim her soul before it was too late. The war begins. But there was one problem. Zubri and Amoni would not let her go so easily. Their power, the wealth, the influence, the fear they commanded, depended on Naya's silence. And when they learned of her plans, they moved swiftly. The night before Naya was to speak before the elders, shadows crept into her home. A whisper slithered through the air. "You belong to us." Naya barely had time to react before she felt the first blow. Pain exploded in her ribs as unseen hands held her across the room. She gasped, clawing at the floor, but the force dragged her back. The candles flickered violently, the air thickening with darkness. And then, fire, a great hiss filled the room. Fire, the spirit serpent, was here. Naya screamed, struggling as an invisible force wrapped around her throat, tightening, squeezing. Zubri and Amoni's voices echoed through the void. "You are ours." Naya fought, thrashing, gasping for breath. She had made her choice. She would not be their offering. And so, with the last of her strength, she reached for the small pouch Mama Johi had given her, a pouch filled with the sacred ash of the ancestors. With a final, desperate cry, she threw the ash into the air. Fire, the room exploded with blinding light. Fire, the serpent let out a deafening shriek. Fire, the darkness recoiled. And then, silence. Naya collapsed, panting, trembling. When she opened her eyes, the shadows were gone. The serpent had retreated. Zubri and Amoni's power had weakened. And in that moment, Naya knew. She had won the first battle. But the war was not over. Tomorrow, she would stand before the elders. Tomorrow, she would confess. And tomorrow, she would face the wrath of Kolongo. If they did not forgive her, the curse would claim her forever. Would she survive? Or had she already lost? The redemption or the fall? The night before her confession, Naya sat in the silence of her small hut, staring at the flickering flame of a single candle. Her hands trembled. Would the village listen? Would they believe her? Or would she be cast out, cursed to roam the earth as something less than human? The voices of the past haunted her. She had spent her life taking, stealing love, destroying homes, chasing power. And now, for the first time, she had nothing left but the truth. She clutched the sacred pouch Mama Johi had given her, feeling its warmth. "You must face them," the old priestess had warned. "Or the curse will consume you." With the first light of dawn, Naya rose. And she walked toward her fate. The confession. The village square was already full when Naya arrived. The elders sat at the center, their wise eyes watching as the people murmured among themselves. The moment Naya stepped forward, the whispers began. "Look at her. What happened to her skin? She was once beautiful, now she looks cursed." Naya ignored them. She stood before the elders, lifting her chin, steadying her breath. And then, she spoke. "I have come to tell the truth." The crowd fell silent. And Naya revealed everything. She spoke of Zubri's deception, how he had lured her to the temple, how the feast had been a trick, how the serpent spirit had mocked her as an offering. She spoke of Amoni's hand in the ritual, how she had watched in silence as Naya was bound to the curse. And she spoke of the hidden price of Zubri's power, how for years, he had sacrificed women like her to the serpent, exchanging their lives for his wealth and influence. The people gasped. The elders' faces darkened. And then, Zubri stepped forward. The final battle. The chief stood tall, his robe heavy with golden embroidery. But his face was twisted with rage. "Lies," he spat. His voice thundered across the village. "She is desperate. A jealous woman, trying to ruin my name because she could not have me." The people looked between them, unsure of what to believe. But then, Amoni spoke. "It is true." A collective gasp spread through the crowd. Zubri's head snapped toward her, fury in his eyes. "Amoni, what are you saying?" She stepped forward, her expression unreadable. You promised me power, she said softly. You promised me wealth. But you did not promise me this. She gestured toward Naya, toward the curse that had nearly destroyed her. And then, she looked at the elders. I have stood by him for years. But this cannot be forgiven. The elders rose from their seats, their faces grim. Chief Zubri, one of them declared. You have betrayed the ancestors. You have broken the sacred laws of Kolongo. You have brought a dark force upon our land. For this, you must answer. The villagers erupted in outrage. But Zubri was not finished. The serpent's revenge. With a snarl of rage, Zubri lifted his hands. A sudden gust of wind tore through the square, snuffing out torches, throwing sand into the air. Naya felt it immediately. Dark magic. The sky darkened, and from nowhere, a low, sinister hiss filled the air. The serpent was coming. Zubri's face twisted in fury as he stretched his arms toward Naya. You dare betray me? You dare challenge my power? Then you will die by it. But before the spell could reach her, Amoni stepped forward. She threw herself between Naya and Zubri, raising her own hands. And for the first time, Amoni chanted. Her voice was clear, strong, commanding. The ground trembled. And then, with a roar, the spirit serpent emerged. But this time, it did not come for Naya. It turned its burning eyes on Zubri. The chief staggered back, eyes wide. No, no. The serpent lunged, its massive form coiling around him. Zubri screamed, thrashing, trying to fight it. But this time, there was no escape. With one final, deafening hiss. Fire, the serpent devoured him whole. Fire. And then, it turned to Amoni. For a moment, she stood still, as if awaiting its judgment. Then, without a sound, fire, she collapsed into dust. The wind carried her away, as if she had never been there at all. The dawn of redemption. When the storm cleared, Zubri and Amoni were gone. The village stood in stunned silence. The curse had been lifted. The serpent had taken its final offering. Naya fell to the ground, her body trembling, her soul free. She was no longer bound. Her beauty had not returned. But she was alive. And for the first time in her life, she had peace. The journey forward. The next morning, the elders gathered the village. They acknowledged Naya's bravery and thanked her for breaking Zubri's dark hold on Kolongo. But her place in the village had changed. She had been saved, but she was still a reminder of what had happened. She could not stay. And so, with one final glance at the only home she had ever known, Naya gathered her things. She did not live in shame. She left with a new purpose. To find a new life. To carry the lessons of her past. And to never again chase power that did not belong to her. As she disappeared into the horizon, the villagers whispered of her for years to come. Not as the temptress of Kolongo, but as the woman who had survived the serpent's curse. Fire, the end. Fire.